So thank you, everyone. I'm going to just kick off, I think, with a thank you to the McNulty Foundation. They would very much have liked to have been here. I do feel like I'm family with the McNulty Foundation. I've been so involved in my life for the last 20 years, and they've been deeply involved in the Aspen Foundation. And I think many of you have attended Aspen events or even this event because they provide donations and sponsorships to fellows to attend the event. I think also a real commitment to amplifying our work. I've had the privilege to work with them on the case study series, Pivotal Moments, and they make significant commitments, I think, to everyone they work with. Also, the commitment goes beyond. I mean, if I look at my life, once you become a laureate, they've just really remained in support. I think many of us don't go as much as we'd like to, Isaac, in a linear venture or project. Some of us have wandered around a bit, and the support has been constant. I think there's also a recognition that as leaders, there's so many pivotal moments. And I think with the expansion of the prize over the years, it's really what are those moments where you most need support? Hence the Catalyst Fund now. The Response Fund, where there are crises, the Innovation Fund, which has been used at the moment by the various chapters of Ali, and then, of course, the McNulty Prize itself, which makes a considerable impact, not only in the money, but I think in the exposure that you all get and the family that you all enter. So they would very much like to have been here today. And hopefully I will do the family justice in this panel. It's always been very important for the family to look at moral courage. And I think that really started, if I look at the evolution, it very much started as individuals. And I noticed how many of you are co-founders. And I think it's always a collective, and it's actually always a we. And I think the prize has very much evolved to that, where they actually look at collaboration and what it means to collaborate in the granting of the prize. So I think it's very aligned with the concepts that we're speaking about. But I'm aware that you've all done extraordinary things, and that one of the areas where you do really need courage is to start. Like how do you take that first step? How do you take that leap? And certainly when we did the case studies, what became quite apparent was that there was some connection with something deeply meaningful for you from your childhood experiences, adult experiences. Sometimes it was a process, sometimes it was a moment of just remarkable clarity. And I'm also cognizant that 3 of you gave up real corporate careers. I mean, Mohammed, you were living in the US, chose to come home. You know, you all made very, very courageous choices. So Rajan, perhaps kick off with you. I think, like, you know, what was it that really enabled you to make that choice?
So I'm not using this one.
Well, I don't know if they work.
Okay. Is this working? I've got a very loud voice, so I probably don't need any mic. Thanks, Anne. Yeah, I think, you know, I'd done a lot of thinking about, you know, being in the corporate sector and wanting to make a change, and I'd started on that journey. But then there is a moment that sticks out, even though it's never just one moment. But there was one particular moment that always makes me think about if something had catalyzed me. It was this moment, and I had come to. I'd come to Bulungulu already, and the co-founder of Bulungulu Incubator, who was here as well, my partner in life, Dave, had started the Bulungulu Lodge, and it was a job creation joint venture with the community. And we were sitting on the veranda of this backpackers lodge that had started, and it's a very remote part of South Africa, a very remote area that was black homeland under apartheid, a Transkei area, and it's got beautiful indigenous forests and of the most beautiful coastlines in the world. I've seen many coastlines. It is of the most beautiful in the world. And we were sitting on the veranda looking out, and in that year, a third of the babies had died of diarrhea in this community. We later did a survey and we found that more than half, 53%, had lost at least one child to diarrhea. 1 in 9 lost 3 or more, and our new families lost 7 or 8 children to diarrhea. And we were sitting there and we were worried about whether the scrambled eggs, were done well enough for the guests, which was the job creation program as the Bulungula Lodge. And we said, what are we doing? I was still working in the corporate sector. I was working in finance, which was my career at the time. And we were going to funerals where the holes that you were digging were this big. And we said, we have to do something about this, but it felt so overwhelming. It feels so overwhelming when you look at the problems, and we've been talking a lot about the problems here, but what needs to be done. But we just started with buying water tanks. So it just started with one thing, and I think what was essential for me was to not become overwhelmed by the problem, and the way that you don't become overwhelmed by the problem is that you just do something now, and you do something practical now. And then that built, and that was more than 20 years ago.
Thanks, Rajan. And I think you make not only the pivotal moment that shifted you, but that first step, a manageable first step. So Mpati, do you want to share with us? I'm aware that you've been very courageous, and it was a very big step. So do you want to share with sort of what triggered that for you?
So thank you, Anne. I think the journey of Heal SA was informed by my own mental health challenges. My mental health challenges, something that I hid away from my friends and my family. Interesting, the first time my mother knew about my mental health challenges, it was when I was interviewed on Cape Talk by Crystal Otterson, and she was in tears, and we're talking late last year. And it was something that I just felt, we just deal with this, and I'm just gonna hide it. But what changed for me, the moment where I thought something needed to happen, I was tasked during COVID to be part of the technical lead. My background is in public health. So we're responsible for making sure that ARVs accessible for hard-to-reach communities and population, and I was driving with medical personnel in townships and rural areas, and as I was driving, I saw facial expression that mimicked my unhealed version of myself. I had the opportunity of, getting on my phone, getting my therapist, and getting myself sorted. And as I navigated that space, I asked myself, what about these people that I saw in me? And I thought to myself, there's an injustice here. And what separates me from them is the fact that I'm privileged. I have the funds to go and seek help. And for most of you who know it, getting support or getting therapy is not cheap. And I started Heal SA in my dining room, and I asked 2 therapists to say, at the time we were social distancing, to start on WhatsApp to provide free mental health services to young people in South Africa. I had a thought to say, a radical thought to say, what would it look like to have every young person accessing mental health services at no cost? And that's where my journey started. I had given myself about 6 months. I was going to do my Eat, Love, and Pray. So I'd saved some money, and I was looking at Asia, and thanks to COVID, I couldn't do that. And I used my savings to start Heal SA. Fast forward to now, we have counseled over 15,000 young people. We have conducted over 100 mental health awareness and advocacy campaigns throughout South Africa in all or most of the universities and high schools in South Africa. We actually are in the process for the first time where we're getting actually an organization that wants us to provide mental health services for their call center. So not wholly dependent on funding now. So we're looking at other ways to make sure that we're sustainable. But what I go to bed, you know, a little bit comfortable knowing that anybody, and if you know the statistics of South Africa, suicide rates and suicide ideation with young people, it's at the almost, it's very high. But just knowing that there's a young person that can call our call center, get a therapist that's qualified, trauma-informed, culturally sensitive, that can respond to their needs. That is what keeps me going. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Paddy. We had a conversation in my smaller session around, in the Ubuntu discussion, just around what it means to give up all your savings, actually. And I know you gave up your savings and some. So, I mean, I think it is deeply courageous. And Rajan, I'm just going to quickly come back to you before I go on, because I didn't give you a chance to just share. Can you just share briefly what the Bulungula Incubator is for those that don't know?
Sure. Yeah, so the Bulungula Incubator, I mean, we started in a crisis situation, which I spoke about before, and we built the organization from there. We then because we were deeply embedded in the community, we responded to the immediate needs. It wasn't it wasn't a grand plan, but essentially it was then went into looking at the fact that there were there was no quality education, no access to healthcare, no access to clean water, to sanitation, to job creation. We knew that we had to build this from the ground up, and we started off just with preschool education. And then it went into, but if you do preschool education, you need healthcare. You need holistic healthcare. So we started a home-based care program, and then there's no clinic, so you have to build a clinic. Then the children come out of the preschool and they go into the local government primary schools that are the most under-resourced in the country, and teachers, we did one survey where teachers arrive for 6 days of a month. So we then did an e-learning program from grade 1, little ones on tablets, and doing mathematics and literacy programs. And then there was no high school in the area. You couldn't complete your high school 30 years after democracy in South Africa at all in this region. So you have to build the Bulungula College. After Bulungula College, you need a job. You also need sport, and you need vibrancy, and you need art and talent competition. So what we call now preconception to career programs that start with a healthy pregnancy. And that starts with healthcare, and then all the way through to the career and vocational stage of life. In a community now, we employ 170 people full-time, of which over 90% are from the local community. And from those babies that weren't even surviving, we now have young people that have been through our entire programs. Remember, that was 20 years ago. And now either work for our organization or in universities across the country, and are coming back into the community to run the programs that we started.
Thanks, Rajan. Every 2 years or so, I'd see Rajan in Cape Town, and then it started at the preschool, and then it was like, we need to speak about high school. We need to speak about careers. It's been interesting watching your journey. And Gary, I think we started to touch on nutrition. And I'm aware you were in a comfortable corporate job and shifted out of that. And, can you just give some background on fuel and, what sort of triggered that shift with you?
Thanks, Anne. Morning, everyone. Yeah, afternoon. I studied in South Africa, went over to the UK as my 20s, and ended up working for Nando's. And I can remember a day where we were on a leadership sort of breakaway, and the moderator asked us to sort of draw a picture of our life going forward. And I sort of drew this path, which was showing me that I was going to end up somewhere different, but it wasn't telling me anything in a clear way. Anyway, decided after 6 years to return home with my kids. I wanted them to be barefoot and under the sun back in South Africa. And I happened to, just before I left, walk into a colleague who's now my partner and co-founder of Fuel. And was just chatting to him. In fact, I was asking him for some advice on relocating and whatnot. And he said to me, well, what are you doing when you go back? So I said, well, I've decided not to join Nando's. Need a change. And I said, well, I'm going to Thailand for 6 weeks, and then I'm going to look for something. So he said, but don't you want to help me with the school feeding program? Now, talking about moments, I would assume he had just finished his first or second seminar, and Isaac was on his back about a project.
It was exactly that moment, Gary.
Yeah. And I mean, speaking on Charles' behalf, this was his opportunity to walk his talk. And so he said to me, but why don't you help me? I want to do a project with the school feeding program in South Africa. So I said, well, what is it? And he said, I don't know much about it, but on one of the coffee breaks, he was chatting to one of his fellows who was part of the president's office, who said how disappointed she had been when she'd been to schools. I think it was in the Eastern Cape, and they were like eating very poor quality sandwiches or whatever. And anyway, so and he said to me, well, you can look for a job just while you're there, just do some consulting for me. And really that was the beginning. So on the 7th of January 2007, we pitched up in Orange Farm and saw how Jam was feeding children. So, yeah, and now 18 years down the line, we're still together, still in at the tail end of sort of handing over the last bits to the Department of Education. Our dream was to bring to catalyze systemic change within the department so that they could hold the 20,000 schools accountable. And when we started, we didn't have a clue. And I almost want to reiterate what Rajan was saying, is we shouldn't not take steps forward just because we don't know where it ends or what the answer is. I have a memory of myself and Anne and a couple of other people that Adi Enthoven had scratched together, sitting in his house in observatory, trying to think, well, how are we going to knock on the door of the Department of Education? Because Fuel didn't even exist. So, yeah, essentially, we really wanted to actually leverage what the government already had. Many countries don't have money for feeding. Many departments of education in Africa, they don't have the money. That's why the World Food Program's there. But our government had, well, it's now got 10 billion rand, feeding 10 million children in 20,000 schools. And so the way we ended up doing it was investing in the people whose job it was to support and hold schools accountable. So leverage their money, leverage their resources, leverage their policy, but none of that was sort of working together. And so that's been the journey. And
Yeah, thanks, Gary. And I mean, made a very significant and measurable result in the quality and consistency of the meals, which I think has been remarkable. And Mohammed, coming last to you, I mean, it's remarkable watching the video, but I know you were in the US, and I guess trying to get a sense of what shifted for you. Um, why did you come back? Why did you start that project? What was it?
Thank you so much for showing that video. Yes, so I grew up in the US in a town called Columbus in Ohio. I went to high school there, I went to university, and then I eventually went to law school. And my vision was mergers and acquisitions, contract law. I envisioned myself spending the rest of my life in the US, making lots of money. And then, yeah, I had a transformational visit to Somalia 12 years ago. I went to Mogadishu and I met my kids that I grew up with when I was very young, and they were living in poverty. Some of them had joined Al-Shabaab, and some of them had died. And I remember standing before my childhood home. It was crumbling, and the walls had bullets, and thinking that this really could have been my life. This is where I could have been, if not for a small chance that I was able to get on one of the last commercial flights out of the city. And so, and then I met some amazing young people. They were amazing. Mogadishu, I often tell people, has about 300 registered universities, and it speaks to this incredible demand for knowledge. It's not necessarily a good thing, but because a lot of them are started just as a business, but it speaks to this incredible thirst for knowledge and improving yourself. And I remember when I was in Mogadishu, there was this man who, electricity in Mogadishu is extremely expensive. So what he did was he removed the electrical components of an espresso machine and included a charcoal component and began selling it to cafes across the city. And he sold about 120 of these pieces. And so I said to myself, like, I need to be a part of this. I need to give back, but really support these young people who had this incredible potential. And so I started IFTIN as a side project while I was living in the US. So on Saturdays and Sundays, I would just work on it, sometimes at nights, and then eventually it started slowly taking over my life. And then I made the decision to eventually move back full-time in Mogadishu. And yeah, so it doesn't show this in the video, but we first began as an economic development organization. We started Somalia's first startup accelerator program. We established a microfinance program. And the idea was kind of help young people raise themselves out of poverty. And when we saw this issue of mental health and trauma being a barrier to economic development, I tried to find a psychiatrist or psychologist or anyone who could help our young people. There was one in Mogadishu for a population of 2 million, and he was completely overwhelmed and he had no time for us. So we reached out to a Somali American expert. I just sent her a message on LinkedIn, and we've been working together for the past 12 years. So we couldn't find any mental health experts, so we essentially built the mental health infrastructure of Somalia from the ground up. We've now certified over 100 mental health experts across the country. 80 of them are working as clinical counselors. They're now providing services to over 100,000 community members. We've trained over 500 teachers, and through our communication and programs around mental health, we've reached about 1 million people. And that really was out of necessity. And I would say 15% of our budget is mental health. Most of our work is in economic development, but we just saw that mental health could not be separated from economic development. And just to answer your question, like, how do you take that first step? And I think it requires a lot of imagination, imagining that you can make a difference. And I really loved what was said yesterday about using our imaginings and exercising imagination, which reminded me of a conversation that we had with one of our clinicians a few years ago. And she told me that trauma actually damages the part of our brain where we imagine our future. And when you think about that, it requires imagination to plan for the future. It requires imagination to imagine yourself starting a business in 5 years. It requires imagination to think about how you're going to contribute to society. And for a lot of young people, they're unable to do that. They're unable to imagine that. And if you can't imagine yourself and your future and planning for your future, then you give up, you join Al-Shabaab, you leave for the Mediterranean and risk your life crossing the ocean. And I often tell people that I don't work in the business of creating jobs, I work in the business of imagination. I help young people build their capacity to imagine a better future and then try to make that future a better reality.
And I think we have an exceptionally young continent, an exceptionally traumatized continent. So I think what you've brought to the fore, enabling this imagining. And I think, Mirijan, I would imagine you've had to work at every single level. And I know you've had your own trauma recently. But maybe just on that issue of imagining, I know you've been going on this for a long time. How have you refreshed that imagining along the way? I mean, you're starting out more, Paddy, you starting out more. I mean, how have you managed to keep on going, and what is that feedback, and who's walked by your side?
I think it's the most important factor for me has been continuing to, or always living in the communities that we serve. I live deeply in the village. Dave and I live we have 2 round mud huts, literally with grass roof. Imagine the Transkei Hills with the rondavels, the round huts in the grass. And we don't have any other home. I mean, it's where we've lived. I traveled back and forth between 2004 and then 2009, came to live there permanently, and that's been my only home. And just by living there, you in constant proximity with people that are getting through lives that takes so much courage. And what people are living through is so incredible. Some people went on the District 6 tour yesterday, and my family were forced to be removed from District 6. They got the letter in 1969. I was born in 74, but they got the letter in 1969 to say you've got to move, and you've got 2 weeks to move. And we'll move to the Cape Flats, which we were talking about in our previous session. It's the biggest crime-ridden area in the country. And, there's a lot of alcoholism, a lot of violence in my own family, and a lot of it came from that brokenness and that trauma of being forcibly removed. But it wasn't as bad, by any means, as bad as that was, and as difficult as that was, in my growing up years, and the trauma that our family lived with, it wasn't as bad as a young girl being born in a village that was declared a black homeland under apartheid, and to get to this village, to the nearest city, it's 2.5 to 3 hours in a 4x4 to get there. So when you're born in a mud hut there, you're not even sure if you're going to survive toddlerhood because there's no clean drinking water. We had clean drinking water. The impact on your health, your brain development, on your ability, when your mom isn't nourished, when she's pregnant with you, will affect what your health is like when you're 50 years old. So one of the children, Lynette.
You've also been going for a long time. And I think your experience is a bit different because you're working in the system and you're working through the schools. So I'm interested in terms of what keeps you going, and you weren't proximate. So how did you get that proximity when you first started, and what keeps you going?
Thanks, Anne. I think because our dream was a system, we had to start somewhere. Interestingly, It was actually through Nando's that we knocked on the door of the Minister of Education, and I remember having lunch with Robbie Brosen with his shirt hanging out and ordering some chicken and chips up to the HOD's office in Pretoria. But so the door opened, and we were sort of asked to help, at a national level, and I think we soon realized that actually, if we really wanted to help the system, we had to go further down, and so we spent one of Rajan's friends, we spent a year just traveling around the country, going to every single province, going to as many districts as we could, going to schools and talking to people and saying, how does it work? And not trying to evaluate them, but just to actually document. And we ended up with this thick thing like this that said, well, this is how 9 work. And we realized we have to start in the province. And literally got a gap through another NGO that was leaving the Northwest Province. And so they introduced us, and that's kind of where we started. I must say that we didn't have a methodology when we started. We didn't have a theory of change. I mean, I don't come from I'm not a theoretical person, but we didn't have a methodology, so we were trying to help from the top with technical solutions, and it was almost through crashing into a wall after 3 years that it forced us to sit and say, but hang on, what is the lever? The lever is the people in the system. The lever is all these people work here. They're going to schools every day. They've just never, ever been shown how to do it. And I suppose also having come from the capitalist world, everything's measured. You know exactly how you're doing. You might not like it, but you've got cash flows and P&Ls and share prices and whatever. So you've got something that's going to tell you, but the government often doesn't think about measuring how well meals get served, or a clinic works, or an ECD functions. And because they're not selling the service. So I often talk about it as eating an elephant, which you do mouthful by mouthful, but I think we've also had to break it into phases. So let's eat the back end of the elephant.
Stop eating the elephant. Remember, I'm an environmentalist.
Because it was around COVID where actually suddenly children weren't at schools, and the department got taken to court because they were not offering food to children who weren't at schools. And they'd never had to do this before, so it's not surprising. Anyway, so it was just 2 years of sort of chaos and no, but I think you also have to buy yourself time to go slow, to go far. That's Charles's analogy. I know he irritates a lot of people when, when funding considerations come in, is go slow to go far. And I think we've really had to go deep into a couple of provinces in order to go far and to go wide. So, yeah. And sorry, I do think as much as I don't see the children eating the food, our customers are the district officials, and it's actually seeing their eyes light up. We've completely changed the way they see their job in their life, and it's that, similar to Rajan, it's just seeing them walk out of these sessions completely empowered to do things differently and actually to do the job that they were asked to do in the first place. So those people keep us going, and most people think that government officials are lazy and useless, but actually we've seen the complete opposite.
Yeah. And I'm glad you emphasized that. So I think just hearing, if you're not proximate, if you're not immersed, that importance of deep listening and learning, which I know you did. And Patty, you haven't been going 20 years. You've just got going. So I guess you're at the beginning of your scale journey. And maybe share with us, how you're thinking about that journey.
I think one of the one thing that kept me going, it was rejection. So we met at Aspen, very excited to be co-leading a dialogue on youth mental health. Very excited. I'm feeling myself. Here we are in Aspen. I get to meet with the CEO of a foundation which was our biggest funder at the time. And I remember going to this really trendy hotel, and we have dinner, and talks about how great the work that I'm doing, and it's following me on LinkedIn, and this is going really nice, we're like on a second bottle of wine, great. Monday morning, I get an email saying, actually, we are not going to fund you. The foundation is redirecting their funds. At the time, I have invested everything into Hilese. I had no notion that this was going to happen, and that was the only fund that we had. We actually had to pause for a month. And I sat there and I said, so what? And what it meant, I had to sell my house because I so much believed in the work that we did. And it also, and fast forward, we had the executive orders where, USA is no longer funding, so you had to really think differently around funding. And I have to be very grateful to Lynette, who was connecting me to all the fellows in terms of, talk to this person. And one of the biggest thing that I got is the exposure, our fellows who were in the media space that gave me the opportunity to go on national TV and talk about Hilese. That has been one of the biggest in-kind contribution that really supported us in terms of there's no way you can Google mental health and youth mental health and Hilese doesn't pop up. So that was amazing, and actually it also helped us in terms of being profiled by different news medias and being on local radios, and also what it did is also talk to the stigma, because as much as I was trying to hype Hilese, but also to talk about the dangers of us not talking about mental health in our homes and so forth. So definitely rejection, and I think also I really enjoyed Chichimanda's article on we should all be feminists, because one of the things that we happen to have as women is we wanted to fit in. So studying Hilese, having, being an executive, sitting on boards, and it's a very lonely journey, and you actually don't fit in, and being okay with not fitting in. So part of what keeps me going is also doing the inner work that I wouldn't have done if I was in a cushy job and I was not challenged. But also what keeps me going is, I come from a very USA background where we're very numbers driven. So every week with our staff, we look at stats, where are we? And I think what excites me is to see men accessing our services, is to seeing white people, calling our help, because you thought, I thought that I would just be responding to, us as, black young people, but to also see that, to say, and also to just being trusted by the community. When I was invited during Youth Month to go to Parliament to talk about Hilese, and I was surprised at how many people knew about Hilese and ministers, and I was like, what? And thanks to the power of thanks to Ali, because I think that's part of me getting the visibility that allows me to then be able to do the work that we do at SA. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thanks. Obviously, I was going to ask Mohammed next, right? So, Mohammed, I mean, I guess it's kind of been easy. I mean, I know you pivoted on your model. You were initially looking at economic developments and jobs, but you know, what moments have been particularly difficult for you, and what is it that just inspires you and keeps you going? And I know you're really driving to scale now.
So I would say, for me, proximity has been a blessing and curse. A blessing because I don't think we would have been able to see this challenge of mental health if I wasn't proximate and really next to the problem. I remember in one of our classrooms, there was this young man who was about to be dropped out of his class because he wasn't really participating, he wasn't showing up. And I sat down with him and had a conversation and found out that a few months previous, his uncle had died, who was the sole breadwinner of his family. And his family was now living in the outskirts of Mogadishu, having fled famine. And every day, in order to get to our class, he would go on a bus and drive several hours. And so I realized, because of proximity, how can I ask him to focus on financial forecasting when he's constantly reliving his trauma? And so that's when we started integrating mental health into all of our programming. And I often do talk about numbers and data because I think one of the biggest challenges is that people don't see mental health as a necessity. Even within health ministries, it's about maybe 5% of the budget. And so the data that we show is that once you, for example, when we invested in mental health, we saw that young people were making 42% more income than those who didn't receive our trauma healing intervention. For those who received our trauma intervention, they were staying in class longer, their businesses were running longer. So we had a 40% dropout rate in our classrooms, our vocational training classrooms. Once we did trauma healing, we had a 15% dropout rate, which was really eye-opening for us. I think for the mental health intervention, I think we kind of understood because we're providing this mental health service. We saw an 80% decrease in anxiety, in depression. That made sense, but I think the economic component really was the biggest difference. And people often ask me, why do you talk about economics? Why do you talk about mental health in such financial terms? But we've been talking about trauma for the past several decades, and we haven't really moved the needle at all, which is why I talk about the economics of trauma and how it prevents generations of people and nations from moving forward. So for me, I think it has also been very challenging. So there's another young man who also grew up in Columbus. He started his own NGO and moved back to Somalia. And a few years ago, we had set up time to have coffee. And I had just left my hotel and was heading to his hotel. And then there was a terrorist attack at the hotel that he was staying in. And him and 26 others were killed in the terrorist attack. And I remember the next day going to this mass burial of 26 people and just asking myself, like, how can I continue? How can I continue on? And many people from the diaspora have actually decided to move away from Somalia because of these type of issues. And what really keeps me going is proximity, because I see the impact on the ground and the amazing results that we're having. There was this young man that we worked with who was formerly a child soldier in Al-Shabaab, and we provided him trauma healing and mental health support, and he started this brick making business. He was about 35 years old, a really quiet and short guy. And so I found out this later, but what he did was over the course of 2 years, he helped 60 other young people defect from Al-Shabaab, which was amazing. Yeah. So it's those type of things that really help me move forward. And in terms of scaling, I think we've developed a toolkit that integrates mental health into any job creation or economic development program. And so the idea is to scale it. We've scaled it across Somalia, but the vision is to scale it globally and really push this idea that economic development and mental health go hand in hand. So the intervention is basically someone signs up for a vocational training class or wants to become a mechanic. He's required to take a 12-week group counseling course where they meet each week and learn about emotional self-regulation, anxiety management, And when you think about the workplace, if you get criticized by a coworker, someone who's traumatized is going to either quit or they're going to fight back and get into a conflict. So we say that economics and mental health go hand in hand, and that's our vision.
Yeah. And I mean, it's an interesting concept of scale because you're shifting a paradigm which will scale beyond anything that you do, which I think the measurement has been really useful in creating those connections. I could carry on speaking to all of you forever, but I'm going to open to the floor because I'm sure that there are questions for the panelists from the floor. I don't know if anyone's can help me with mics. Thanks, Rupawe. There's like hands here. There are lots of hands. I'll take a few questions and then I'll put it to the panelists.
Yeah, thank you. Monique here. Short question. I'm curious to know how you sustain the whatever initiatives that you both of all of you are doing financially. How do you get funded? How do you keep it sustainable?
Thank you. I'll take a couple of questions and then I'll put them to different panelists.
Hi, Mohammed, good to see you again. A question for you. You mentioned that, pardon? Yeah, hi. You mentioned, good to see you again. You mentioned that the proximity was a good thing and not so good thing. What was not so good about, what is not so good about the proximity?
Okay, I'll hold the questions.
Hi, Nike here. A quick question around succession planning, especially for, I think, two of you that have been doing this for quite a while. You've delivered impact and it had a wider scale. So what happens after you? And I think that's the problem with founders, is that critical succession plan, when you want to transition out, because you're going to transition out at some point. What is that looking like? Because that's going to shut down if you don't think about that.
Okay, take one more. Yeah. I can hear you, it's fine.
So my question is specific to Mohammed. I come from a region of not this much period of conflict, but imagine conflict northern Nigeria. I'd like to know how have you been able to overcome cultural barriers? How have you been able to overcome the seen as that American agent who's come after to, disrupt what is the norm? So that's what I want to know. Those cultural barriers that exist, how do you
Okay, thanks very much. Thank you, everyone. So, Mohammed, let me perhaps start with you on, there were two questions really to you. I did hear some of the negatives of proximity in terms of physical danger that you live in, but perhaps just to say more around the complexities of proximity, good and bad. And then I think the second question is you were out of the country and you've come back. So how have you managed to negotiate some of the cultural barriers or perceptions around that?
So I think I've realized over the years, I spent 25 years learning to be American, so I could go back to Somalia and realize I know absolutely nothing. So I think humbleness has been really important in my journey, and knowing that I don't know anything, I don't know everything, and I'm willing to accept criticism and willing to accept that I need to learn. And I think the cultural part has really been very challenging because for many Somalis who had never left, they don't understand why I came back. So there's a nickname in Somali for people like me who decided to go back. They call us Adam. Adam who was cast out from paradise and thrown down to earth. So they can't imagine why I would come back to this challenging environment. And it really speaks to how society sees itself, because it can't really imagine coming back or staying in Somalia. And really it's a failure of collective imagination. And so that's probably one of the biggest challenges that I've had to overcome in kind of pushing people to imagine a different future. And I think definitely proximity has been challenging because of physical danger, and also Somalia is very fractured by clan lines. So it's also been very challenging kind of navigating those dynamics. I think that growing up in the US, I was never taught about clans and different clans, and so it took me a long time to learn about that. And it's been difficult kind of breaking that barrier. But again, I think one of the things that has really helped me is just seeing these young people and how they are passing on the skills that we give them to their peers. So they're teaching their family members on how to manage panic attacks, how to use their skills to manage anxiety. We've seen teachers who would normally kind of punish students who are having panic attacks now doing breathing exercises with them. So it's those things that have really helped me. And so the proximity has kind of eventually become better and better. Yeah.
Thank you. Thanks very much. And I guess the one question, which I know both of you have done very systemic approaches to your work on succession. But maybe, Rajan, first you, and then I'll hand over to Gary, who I now proudly told me there's a handover to the 9th province. Okay, but Rajan, do you want to go first on succession?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's a question and a topic we've been thinking about from the beginning, you know. And I always said that my job is to work myself out of this job. And I will be as successful as while I do that. One thing that Dave and I have done, we've done it 3 times, and next year will be the 4th time, is every 5th year we go away. We go backpacking in a region for a whole year. So there's one thing about when you go away for 1 month or even 3 months, right, is that when you go for 1 month, it's just taking leave and people manage, and 3 months, but a whole year, people really have to step up. And I always say, whenever we're preparing to go, I say, there are rubber balls and there are glass balls. These are the 5 glass balls. Don't drop the glass ones, they'll break, okay? So those are the really important ones. You can't have too many of those. But the rubber ones, allow them to fall because they'll bounce back and things will be okay. So you've also got to let go of your control over how things are and how they should be. And things always change and things go wrong. But it's good for things to go wrong because that's where organizations change, how they evolve, and they become resilient and they become anti-fragile. And that's what you're trying to build. 3 years ago, we started with a very intentional 10-year plan and said at the end of this 10-year plan, there's a hard stop out. And that really concentrated the minds of people that have been from our local community. Remember, education has been a problem where we are, right? So people don't have university education. The managers that have been with the organization for 10 years, for 15 years, have come through the organization with matric certificates, not even matric certificates, and are now managing all the finances of the organization, all the HR, all the projects, and doing very, very well. But to get that confidence. Confidence is the most important thing that you build in anybody. And so building that very intentionally and with outside consultants and with trauma-informed development specialists as well, to see how somebody might be holding themselves back where that they can step into a leadership position, but they don't know that they can step into a leadership position, and building that. So it's not just about being able to do the job because I know that this person can do the job, is that they understand that they can do the job. And then how you do that over a long period of time. Because doing anything well, often the time variable is what we get wrong. We think we can do it tomorrow, we can do it in 2 years, we can do it in 3 years, but you actually need to be doing it in 10 years or 15 years, and that's how you develop succession. Succession is not the year before you decide to retire. Succession happens 15 years before you decide to move on, and what support is needed. And there's also going to be a structural change where we have our students coming with university certificates now for the very first time, and then what it is they can do and how we can develop them and catalyze them into greater positions of leadership.
Thanks, Rajan. And I think, Gary, maybe just speak, because it's partly about succession, it's partly about your work being sustained. So you can maybe just give us a brief view how you've embedded it in the system.
Okay. I think I'm a bit screwed at knowing that I have to start 15 years before the end.
Yeah, that's why I said speak in the embedded system.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's a great question, and I think it's one that, you know, myself and Charles and others are thinking about, because, and I'm going to try and answer it a little more around the legacy rather than just the pure succession, because we were lucky enough, we literally started the first province in 2009, went one at a time. The way, there's the what we do, and then there's the how we do it. And the how is probably the most special piece, because that's why people in government change. That's why they go about their jobs differently. And I think a big part of that is co-creation. So we had to go one province at a time. We could never walk into Limpopo and say, well, look, here's a wonderful Northwest thing, let's just use it. And fortunately, the methodology has now been adopted nationally and is partly embedded into policy at the national level. I think the last handover of the school nutrition program to the department worries me less. About 2 years ago, the early childhood work got transferred from the Department of Social Development into the Department of Education. And 6 months later, we got a call from one of the senior guys in Limpopo saying, please, can you just help us? I mean, a lot of the people who came from social development felt very unwelcomed because they're not teachers, they're social workers, and we're about curriculum. So, and the beauty of the last 3 years is that we've now taken that methodology into early childhood, where just like the 500 field workers in the school nutrition program support 20,000 schools, we've got 60 social workers supporting 3,000 funded centers. And if I could tell you that the journey that we followed is exact, I'm like just so blown away with how common it is. And so the way I'm thinking about it is Fuel can't carry on only doing this. Who else should be doing this, and how do we bottle it? How do we bottle it? How do we package it? You know, you could have private consultants doing it. So that's what I'm dreaming about. The succession of Fuel in itself is challenging. I like that question, but I'm hoping that this methodology can be adopted in not just in Department of Education, and become, because it's essentially about measuring success. If everybody's aligned on success, well, they stop working in silos and they can start measuring it.
Yeah, because I think the issue of succession is really about the legacy, what can be adopted by others. I mean, we would all hope to work ourselves out of a job. I think given the scale of the complexity, it's probably not going to happen. The fundraising one, I'm not sure that I want to go down that rabbit's hole because it is the critical issue. And if I look, because I've interviewed so many of the laureates, I'm not necessarily going to dive down the fundraising hole with you. I think one of the things, I mean, I know, Rajan, you and Dave had you had almost nothing when you went. I would imagine it was a big risk for you to go. I think, Gary, you're a different model, because you had core funders who walked the journey with you, who committed to it. We heard about your funding crisis. I mean, my experience of interviewing the laureates is it goes through ups and downs. I mean, sometimes people have had no money. I mean, they're the same strategies for finding money that we all use. I think the network is really useful. And I think in the concept of Ubuntu, how do we support each other more effectively? I think is something that we should unpack and continue to think about, and often how we work with the diaspora and others. But I think fundraising is an ongoing challenge for the sector, and I think how we think about it differently. So I'm not going to go down that because I see other hands, and I'm probably just going to take one more question. Sula, I have no idea when I need to stop. 5 minutes. Okay, good to know. I think just speak loudly. They have a life of their own.
A huge congratulations to all of you guys. It's extremely heartwarming stuff. I hate to be that guy. My question to you guys is a bit granular in its detail. You mentioned a budget, an annual budget, I think, of about 3 billion. And learners attended, which by my sort of back of the math is about 2,000 per learner. On a daily basis, that works out to a minuscule amount. So there's a huge cause for concern as you go through this process of handing back into the government. What you foresee as a sustainability prospects, and considering obviously the bigger dimension and paradigm of states, efficiency,
But Gary, can I ask you to answer that as efficiently and shortly as possible?
Thanks for the question. I mean, I think the beauty is that it's always been government's money. Fuel has never received 1 cent, and we've never given them 1 cent. I think the other positive is that it's a conditional grant, which is part of the medium-term expenditure framework. And I think, and I think COVID taught us what happens if you don't feed children. So I have a belief that the funding will continue, and that hopefully the methodology that we've partnered on them with will help them hold the 20,000 schools accountable.
I wanted to just pitch into on this issue of funding. I think with everything that's happening globally right now, I think it's important to understand that we have local infrastructure and local resources that we can mobilize ourselves to support our communities. So for example, several years ago, 60% of our funding was cut off. And we made a decision at that time to actually start social enterprises and businesses to reinvest in our nonprofit. So we actually, our mental health experts, we gave them seed grants to start businesses of their own. So they were generating income from their businesses and at the side actually providing mental health services. We now run cold storage units across the country that generates revenue for the mental health services of our programs. So I think it's important to realize that there are local resources. You can use trade and business as a tool to actually generate revenue for your organization. So it's all about thinking outside of the box.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think given the context of this conference and reduction in aid and external support, I mean, even listening yesterday to the Ali Secretariat, I mean, funding through leadership consulting effectively, and I think different ways of thinking about how we resource our work. But the other thing that I've noticed, which you speak about, Gary, is you're drawing on existing structures and you're leveraging existing concepts. And Dixon Chabanda, who's going to be speaking next on the Friendship Bench, I think, leverages in very cost-effective ways, as Bio speaks, communal thinking and thinking around Ubuntu. So I also think not to fall into the structural traps around historic ways of thinking, both around fundraising and also ignoring what we bring and what we have, I think are going to be increasingly important. as we move forward. So will you please join me in a really inspirational panel? It's been such a privilege. Thank you very much.